Hi, my name is Laurie Holland, and my first experience with death was when I was 8 years old. My grandfather died on my mom's side, and he was like 20 years older than my grandmother, so I think that's why, being that young. He was 72, and I had recently accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, and of course came from a loving family, so the funeral wasn't very scary for me, being 8, my first funeral. I was raised where my parents taught me and my brothers that, death is a part of life, and we have the assurance that someday we will see our loved ones again in heaven. There are those of us, though, that will lose a loved one in not such a natural way as what we would want, which brings me to my worst experience of death. And again, like many of you, I had a high school sweetheart. Kids used to say, "You have a cartoon name," because his name was Bart. And we just had a wonderful youth, young love, dating all through high school. He and my brother were best friends. He was a year older than me, so he went on to college when I was still a senior. But we actually got engaged shortly after I graduated, and me being young and foolish, I ended up breaking up with Bart, and we went our separate ways. We actually married other people that ended up being wrong. But 20-something years later, I was in a good place in my life. I was in my late 30s. I had a good job. I had just bought my first home, and I got a call one night from a longtime girlfriend that I had known since the 4th grade, and she said, "Laurie, you won't believe I was at a Dallas football game, and I ran into Bart Holland, and he's single, Laurie. He's single. You need to give him a call." And I'm like, I'm not going to give him a call. And about a week later, I get a call from my brother, who, they were best friends, that Bart had actually written him a letter inquiring about my family and me. And so that was actually our reconnection after all those many years. And we started a long-distance dating relationship. He lived in Dallas, I lived in Houston, and it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And we just felt like God brought us back together, and it was right. And he proposed to me in the fall of 2000, and I moved to Dallas after, selling my home, and found a job in Dallas and moved there early in 2001. And we began our lives together. We bought a home, we found a church home. We actually designed our wedding announcements because we just wanted to get married. We didn't want a big wedding. We wanted a big reception. So we designed our announcements that included our picture of our prom, our high school picture, which was kind of cool. And we planned it to where we had all of our loved ones and friends receive this announcement on the day that we got married, which was Valentine's Day, and we had chosen that day. So it was all just a fairy tale storybook time. Our families were elated that we were together again, and life was good. And a couple of weeks later, on a Saturday night, Bart's older brother, Jeff, called and asked if he could go to church with us on Sunday. We had been inviting him for some time, and so we were really excited that he agreed to come with us to church. So the next morning, Jeff came over, and we went to church, and went and had lunch after church, and came back to our house and just hanging out for the afternoon. And the TV was on, the guys were watching TV. I think I was getting some wash together or something, and Bart got up and went upstairs, and just moments later, Jeff and I heard this real loud noise, and so Jeff hopped up and went upstairs and started screaming for me, and I went up there, and Bart had fallen face down on the hardwood and had busted his face, and he was unconscious. And Jeff, thankfully, was a police officer. He started performing CPR, and I called 911. And moments later, the paramedics came. I rode in the ambulance to the hospital, and I was hysterical. Called my parents in Houston, and pray for Bart. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's wrong with him, but please pray. And We got to the emergency room, and they immediately ushered me and Bart's brother into a private room, which later I realized was a very bad thing. A chaplain came in moments later, tried to console both of us, prayed with us, and we waited, and he, got us to talking about Bart. But about 45 minutes later, the ER doctor came in and just shook his head and said, we worked and we worked and we couldn't save Bart. We just couldn't save him. He was 44 years old, and we had been married for 16 days, which started my very long, dark journey of grief. After a couple of hours of all that you have to do at the hospital, I walked into our beautiful home without my beautiful husband. And I believe that God puts a protective veil over those of us that go through something so tragic. Some people call it shock. Whatever it was, I was grateful for it. Because, from that point on, you have to go on with all the details of the funeral and picking out a casket and burial and just things that, I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that Bart was dead. He was never coming back. And then you have to do all these other things. And so made it through all that. And after, a couple of weeks, when all your family and your friends leave and you're just left there alone and with all this brokenness and shattered dreams and confusion and loneliness, and I just didn't want to live. I didn't want to go on. I prayed that God would take my life, because it's like, what's the use? Why did all this happen to bring us to this wonderful point of happiness, for it all to just be for naught, gone? He's gone. And of course I started the why God, why Bart? He was such a wonderful person. He was so smart. He was an engineer who wrote computer software. He had had 14 patents granted. He had led a team of engineers in Japan for 2 years. He was wonderfully funny and played guitar and sang, and he had a startup company that went public and was very successful. And it was, how do you explain someone like that having to die? Why not me? So it was several months after Bart died that I had a very defining moment happen, and I actually had come home from work one day and physically laid down in the backyard and just looked up to the heavens and just told God, take me, use me. He didn't take me literally, but I kept waking up every day, so I asked him just to take me and use me for his glory and to further his kingdom however I could. So grief is very hard work, and you have to work on it, because you actually go through it and you do reach another side. And for me, I got every book I could find that was about losing your spouse, losing a loved one, that I just soaked up everything and other people that had gone through it. And I joined a grief share group through my church, and I actually had individual personal counseling, and just really worked at trying to understand and to be able to go on with my life. Only by the grace of God and His mercy that He showed me during that time am I able to be where I am today. And I hope that maybe something I've said might help someone else that's going through the same thing, because God truly did turn what was weeping into joy, and I know that I will see Bart again someday.